Number 1. In the late summer of 2018, the Watts family appeared to be the curated definition of the American dream in Frederick, Colorado. They lived in a large, 5-bedroom suburban home valued at nearly $500,000. Chris Watts was 33, a fit, soft-spoken operator for Anadarko Petroleum who was widely regarded by neighbors as a quiet, devoted father. Shannon Watts, 34, was a vibrant and ambitious woman who documented their lives relentlessly on social media, painting a portrait of a happy marriage and 2 adorable daughters, 4-year-old Bella and 3-year-old Celeste. To the outside world, and even to Shannon herself, Chris was the rock, the man who fixed things, the man who never raised his voice, the best dad in the world. They had a 3rd child on the way, a boy they planned to name Nico. But the camera lens is a filter, not a mirror. Beneath the polished surface, the foundation of the family was rotting. They were drowning in consumer debt and facing bankruptcy. More importantly, Chris Watts had undergone a physical transformation that mirrored a psychological shift. As he lost weight and got in shape, his ego swelled, and he began an affair with a coworker, Nicole Kessinger. For the first time in his life, Chris felt pursued and dominant. Criminologists refer to what happened next as a narcissistic collapse. In his warped psychology, his family ceased to be people he loved and became obstacles to the new life he felt entitled to. He didn't want a divorce, which would bring financial ruin and social judgment, he wanted an erasure. The horror unfolded in the early hours of August 13. Shannon returned home from a business trip to Arizona at around 2 in the morning, dropped off by a friend. She entered the house pregnant, tired, and hoping to fix her crumbling marriage. What happened in the master bedroom was an ambush. According to his later confessions, Chris straddled Shannon while she was in bed and strangled her. She didn't fight back initially, likely thinking he was initiating intimacy, until it was too late. He watched the life leave the eyes of the woman who had carried his children. But the true depth of his monstrosity, the detail that haunts investigators to this day, happened next. His 4-year-old daughter, Bella, walked into the room. She saw her father wrapping her mother in a sheet. She asked, "What's wrong with mommy?" Chris didn't panic. He didn't call the police. He told her mommy was sick. He loaded Shannon's body into the floorboard of the back seat of his work truck. Then, he ushered his 2 living daughters into the truck. He drove them for 45 minutes to a remote oil battery site known as Survey 319. The children sat in the back, silent, perhaps sensing the darkness radiating from their father, with their mother's corpse at their feet. At the site, Chris Watts buried Shannon in a shallow grave he dug in the hard earth. Then, he turned to his children. He smothered 3-year-old Celeste with her own blanket. He then picked up her small body and forced it through the 8-inch hatch of an oil tank containing crude oil. Bella, the 4-year-old, watched this happen. She was intelligent and aware. As her father came back for her, she screamed, "Daddy, no." She fought for her life. Autopsy reports later revealed she had bitten through her tongue and had defensive lacerations in her mouth. But she was no match for his strength. He smothered her and disposed of her body in a second oil tank. The symbolism was terrifying. He didn't just kill them, he submerged them in toxic sludge, erasing them from the surface of the earth, treating his own flesh and blood like industrial waste. The investigation moved at lightning speed because of Shannon's friend, Nicole Atkinson, who noticed Shannon's absence immediately and called the police. By that afternoon, the media had arrived. This led to the infamous porch interview. Chris Watts stood outside his house, arms crossed, rocking back and forth, talking to a news crew. He pleaded for his family to come home. He said, "I just want them back." But the world saw through him. FBI profilers and body language experts watching the footage noted that duping delight, a subtle, suppressed smirk that appears when a liar thinks they are fooling someone. He referred to his family in the past tense. He talked about the house being too quiet, focusing on his own discomfort rather than their safety. He didn't look like a grieving husband, he looked like a man trying to remember lines from a script he hadn't fully memorized. Even his neighbor, Nate Tragedies, knew. Nate showed the police his security camera footage, which captured Chris backing his truck up to the garage, something he never did. As Chris watched the footage with the police, he was visibly shaking, burying his face in his hands. He wasn't grieving, he was panicking. The Colorado Bureau of Investigation brought Chris in. He failed a polygraph test miserably. Agent Tammy Lee, a master interrogator, used a psychological tactic known as minimization. She offered him an out. She suggested that perhaps Shannon had done something to the kids, and Chris killed her in retaliation. Desperate to save his nice guy image, Chris grabbed the bait. He confessed to killing Shannon but claimed he caught her strangling the girls on the baby monitor. It was a vile lie, blaming the victim to save himself. But it was enough to reveal the location of the bodies. When investigators arrived at Survey 319, the reality broke them. The recovery of the children's bodies from the oil tanks was a traumatic operation that left seasoned detectives in tears. Confronted with the physical evidence and the sheer impossibility of his story, Chris Watts eventually accepted a plea deal. To avoid the death penalty, he pleaded guilty to 9 counts, including 5 counts of first-degree murder. At his sentencing, the judge called this the most inhumane and vicious crime he had ever overseen. Chris Watts was sentenced to 5 consecutive life terms without parole. He sits in a Wisconsin prison today, a man whose narcissism led him to believe he could trade his family for a fresh start, only to end up with nothing but the 4 walls of a cell. Number 2. If Chris Watts was the impulsive annihilator, John List was the meticulous planner. In 1971, the List family lived in Breeze Knoll, a 19-room Victorian mansion in Westfield, New Jersey, complete with a ballroom and a Tiffany stained glass skylight. John List was a 46-year-old accountant, a devout Lutheran, and a Sunday school teacher. To the outside world, he was the picture of dull, middle-class respectability. He wore thick-rimmed glasses and suits, and his neighbors saw him as a quiet, introverted man. But behind the mansion's heavy doors, the walls were closing in. John List was a man of rigid contradictions. He had lost his job as a bank vice president but couldn't bear the shame of telling his family. For months, he engaged in a humiliating charade. He dressed in a suit every morning, took the train to the city, and spent the day reading newspapers at the train station, eating a meager lunch, and coming home at 5 p.m. to play the role of the provider. The mortgage was unpaid, and the bank was threatening foreclosure. But for John List, the crisis wasn't just financial, it was spiritual. He believed that the 1970s, with its hippies, rock music, and declining morals, was corrupting his children. His daughter Patricia wanted to be an actress, which he saw as a path to hell. In his warped, obsessive-compulsive religious logic, he concluded that poverty would turn his family away from God. To save their souls, he decided he had to destroy their bodies. The massacre was planned with the cold precision of an accountant closing a ledger. On the morning of November 9, 1971, the children left for school. John List waited in the kitchen. When his wife, Helen, came down for her morning coffee, he shot her in the back of the head. She died instantly. He then walked upstairs to the third-floor apartment where his 84-year-old mother, Alma, lived. He kissed her on the cheek, then shot her above the left eye. With the adults dead, List went into cleanup mode. He dragged his wife's body into the grand ballroom. He scrubbed the blood from the kitchen floor so the children wouldn't notice anything wrong when they came home. Then, he made himself a sandwich. He ate lunch in a house with 2 fresh corpses, waiting for the school bus. When 16-year-old Patricia and 13-year-old Frederick arrived home, he shot them each in the back of the head. He dragged their bodies into the ballroom, placing them on sleeping bags next to their mother. He then drove to the bank to close his accounts and went to watch his eldest son, 15-year-old John Jr., play in a high school soccer game. He stood on the sidelines, cheering, a father proud of the son he knew he was about to murder. When they returned home, John Jr. put up a fight. He realized something was wrong. List shot him 10 times. He then dragged his son's body to the ballroom to join the others. The scene John List left behind was a masterpiece of macabre theater. He arranged the bodies of his wife and children in a line on sleeping bags. He knelt and prayed over them. He turned the thermostat down to near freezing to preserve the bodies. He piped religious choral music through the mansion's intercom system, creating a haunting soundtrack for the dead. Before he left, he sat down at his desk and wrote a 5-page letter to his pastor. In it, he didn't express remorse, he offered a justification. He explained that he saw no other way to ensure his family would enter heaven. He then did something that revealed his true vanity and cunning. He meticulously cut his own face out of every single family photograph in the house. He knew police would need a picture to hunt him, and he wasn't going to give them one. He turned off the lights, locked the doors, and vanished into the night. It would be a month before the neighbors noticed the lights burning day and night and the music playing on a loop. When police finally broke in, the smell of death was overwhelming, and the boogeyman of Westfield was long gone. For 18 years, John List was a ghost. The case went cold. The mansion eventually burned down under suspicious circumstances. List built a new life in Colorado and later Virginia, remarrying and working as an accountant under the name Bob Clark. He was a pillar of his new community, just as he had been in the old one. He attended church, held barbecues, and lived a lie so complete that his new wife had no idea she was sleeping next to a mass murderer. The breakthrough came in 1989, thanks to the television show America's Most Wanted. Forensic sculptor Frank Bender created a bust of what John List would look like after nearly 2 decades of aging. He intuitively gave the bust a pair of stern, thick-rimmed glasses, guessing that List's vanity would prevent him from switching to contacts. The bust was broadcast on national television. A neighbor in Virginia saw it and thought it looked exactly like her quiet neighbor, Bob Clark. The FBI arrested Bob Clark. Even with his fingerprints matching John List, he denied his identity for months. Finally, faced with irrefutable evidence, the mask slipped. In 1990, a jury convicted him of 5 counts of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced him to 5 consecutive life terms. At his sentencing, List showed no remorse, maintaining that he had prayed over the bodies and believed he would be reunited with them in heaven. He died in prison in 2008, the accountant who balanced his books with blood. Number 3. In the annals of French criminal history, no name evokes more mystery and dread than Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès. Unlike the explosive rage of American Annihilators, the tragedy of the Dupont de Ligonnès family is a story of aristocratic pride, religious delusion, and a cold, calculated exit that remains unsolved to this day. In early 2011, the family lived in a bourgeois townhouse in Nantes, western France. Xavier, 50, was a count by lineage, a man who projected an image of noble success. His wife, Agnes, was a devout Catholic who worked at a local school. They had 4 children, Arthur, 21, Thomas, 18, Anne, 16, and Benoit, 13. To the neighbors, they were the perfect French family, polite, private, and pious. But behind the shutters of 55 Boulevard Schumann, the noble facade was crumbling. Xavier was a failed businessman. He had squandered his wife's inheritance on a series of disastrous ventures and was running a Ponzi-like scheme, borrowing money from mistresses and friends to pay off earlier debts. By 2011, the creditors were closing in. He was facing not just bankruptcy, but the ultimate humiliation of a fallen aristocrat. For a man defined by his lineage and status, the shame was intolerable. He decided that death, for everyone but himself, was preferable to dishonor. The preparation was methodical, chilling in its foresight. In the months leading up to April, Xavier purchased a silencer for a .22 long rifle he had inherited from his father. He visited a shooting range to practice. He bought cement, quicklime, and heavy-duty garbage bags. He didn't act out of passion, he was executing a logistical operation. The timeline of the murder suggests a staggered execution. On the night of April 3, 2011, after a family dinner, Xavier likely killed his wife Agnes and his 3 eldest children, Arthur, Anne, and Benoit, while they slept. He shot them at close range, twice in the head, with the silencer ensuring the neighbors heard nothing. The next day, the house was silent. Xavier spent the day responding to emails and chatting with friends, behaving as if nothing had happened. His second son, Thomas, was away at university. Xavier lured him home with a lie about Agnes being in an accident. Thomas arrived on the evening of April 5. After eating dinner with his father, he too was executed in his sleep. Even the 2 family Labradors were shot and buried. What Xavier did next demonstrates a terrifying compartmentalization. He buried the 5 bodies and the 2 dogs under the terrace in the back garden. He wrapped them carefully, burying them with religious icons, a small cross or a rosary, suggesting a warped sense of spiritual mercy. He then covered the graves with cement and piled garden furniture on top to hide the disturbance. With the bodies hidden, Xavier began the process of erasing his existence. He sent a bizarre, typed letter to friends and family. In it, he claimed that he was a secret agent for the American Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA, and that the family had been entered into a witness protection program. He warned them not to try to contact the family for years. It was a fantastical lie, designed to buy him time. And it worked. Police didn't investigate the house for weeks. By the time investigators dug up the terrace on April 21 and found the decomposing remains, Xavier was long gone. CCTV footage tracked him on a strange odyssey through southern France. He stayed in luxury hotels, dined alone, and was last seen on April 15 in the town of Roquebrune-sur-Argens. He parked his car, picked up a bag containing a rifle case, and walked into the mountains. He has never been seen since. Theories abound. Did he commit suicide in a remote cave? Or did he use his secret agent lie as a blueprint for a real escape, perhaps to South America? Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès remains the phantom of Nantes, a man who erased his entire bloodline to save his own ego. Number 4. If John List was the face of the past, Scott Peterson is the defining face of the modern American sociopath. In 2002, Scott and Lacey Peterson were the golden couple of Modesto, California. Scott was 30, a handsome and charming fertilizer salesman. Lacey was 27, bubbling with energy, and 8 months pregnant with their first child, a son they had already named Connor. They had the nice house, the supportive families, and the bright future. But Scott Peterson was living a double life. To Lacey, he was the excited father-to-be. To the rest of the world, he was a man desperate to escape the trap of domesticity. In November of 2002, he met a massage therapist named Amber Fry. He didn't just have a fling, he told Amber a calculated lie. He told her he was a widower, claiming this weeks before his wife actually disappeared. He was already scripting Lacey's death in his mind, testing out the role of the grieving single man. On Christmas Eve, 2002, Lacey Peterson vanished. Scott claimed he had left that morning for a solo fishing trip at the Berkeley Marina, 90 miles away, leaving Lacey at home to walk the dog. When he returned, the house was empty, the dog was in the yard with its leash on, and Lacey was gone. The timing, Christmas Eve, guaranteed a media firestorm. Scott played the part of the confused husband, but the cracks appeared almost immediately. He seemed detached, more concerned with his image than his missing wife. He declined to take a polygraph. But the smoking gun was Amber Fry. 6 days after Lacey vanished, Amber saw the news and realized the man she was dating, who claimed to be a widower, was actually the center of a national missing person search. She went to the police. For months, Amber Fry worked as a double agent, recording hundreds of hours of phone calls with Scott. These tapes, later played in court, revealed the true Scott Peterson. While search parties scoured the wetlands for his pregnant wife, Scott was on the phone with his mistress, laughing, charming her, and pretending to be in Paris for New Year's Eve. In reality, he was at a candlelit vigil for Lacey. The duality was chilling. He wasn't grieving, he was relieved. The tragic resolution came in April 2003. A massive storm churned the waters of the San Francisco Bay. The body of a male fetus, with its umbilical cord still attached, washed ashore. A day later, the torso of a woman washed up a mile away. DNA confirmed it was Lacey and Connor Peterson. They were found exactly where Scott said he had gone, fishing. The police moved to arrest Scott. They found him in San Diego, near the Mexican border. He had dyed his hair blonde, grown a goatee, and his car was packed with camping gear, for cell phones, and $15,000 in cash. He was clearly preparing to run. The trial was a sensation. Prosecutors argued that Scott strangled or smothered Lacey at home, then transported her body in his boat to the bay, weighing her down with homemade concrete anchors. The motive was freedom from the responsibility of fatherhood and marriage. In 2004, the jury convicted him of first-degree murder for Lacey and second-degree murder for Connor. He was sentenced to death. However, in 2020, the California Supreme Court overturned his death sentence due to procedural errors in jury selection, though the conviction stood. He was resentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Scott Peterson sits in Mule Creek State Prison today, maintaining his innocence, a man who threw away a life of privilege because he viewed his own son as an inconvenience. Number 5. In the hierarchy of family annihilators, there is a special circle of hell reserved for Susan Smith. Her crime didn't just destroy a family, it manipulated the racial tensions of an entire nation. In 1994, Susan Smith was a 23-year-old mother living in Union, South Carolina. She was separated from her husband, David Smith, and raising two young sons, 3-year-old Michael and 14-month-old Alex. On the night of October 25, 1994, a frantic Susan Smith ran to a nearby house, screaming for help. She told police that she had been carjacked at a stoplight by a black man with a gun. She claimed the man forced her out of her burgundy Mazda Protege and drove off with her two babies still strapped in their car seats in the back. For 9 days, America watched in horror. Susan Smith and her estranged husband David appeared on national television, weeping and pleading for the return of their beautiful boys. The image of Susan, trembling and clutching photos of Michael and Alex, broke millions of hearts. A massive manhunt was launched for the black carjacker. Sketches were drawn, roadblocks were set up, and racial tensions in the small town flared. But Sheriff Howard Wells sensed something was wrong. Susan's story had inconsistencies. The traffic light where she claimed the carjacking happened was triggered by sensors, but there were no other cars around to trigger a red light. Furthermore, her demeanor, though hysterical, seemed performative to trained eyes. The investigation turned inward. Detectives discovered that Susan was having an affair with a wealthy local man named Tom Findley. Just days before the carjacking, Findley had written Susan a breakup letter. In it, he stated that while he cared for her, he was not ready for the responsibilities of a ready-made family. He didn't want children. To Susan, a woman with a history of depression and a desperate need for male validation, stemming from a traumatic history of sexual abuse by her stepfather, the children suddenly became the only obstacle to the life she wanted. On November 3, after failing a polygraph test and facing intense questioning, the facade broke. Susan Smith confessed. There was no carjacker. There was no black man. She admitted that on the night of October 25, she drove her boys to John D. Long Lake. She strapped Michael and Alex into their car seats. She put the car in neutral, released the handbrake, and stepped out. She stood on the boat ramp and watched as the Mazda rolled slowly into the dark water. It took 6 minutes for the car to submerge. For 6 minutes, her children were alive, trapped in the dark, watching the water rise, while their mother stood on the shore and did nothing. The recovery of the car was a scene of utter devastation. Divers found the Mazda upside down on the lakebed. The two boys were still strapped in their seats, their hands floating in the water. One diver later said he would never forget the sight of their small, terrified faces. The trial was emotional and divisive. Susan's defense team argued she was mentally ill, driven to the brink by abuse and rejection, and intended to kill herself but backed out at the last second. The prosecution painted her as a cold-blooded Medea who sacrificed her children for a lover. The jury convicted her of 2 counts of murder. She avoided the death penalty and was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. That 30-year mark arrives in November 2024. Susan Smith, now in her 50s, will face a parole board. While she claims to be a changed woman, the image of that car sinking into the black water remains burned into the collective memory. She remains one of the most hated women in America, a symbol of the ultimate betrayal of the maternal instinct.